In the early days of humanity's journey beyond Earth, people dreamed of finding other civilizations. For centuries, they had looked at the stars with wonder, asking themselves whether they were alone or whether someone else was out there, waiting. Generations of explorers, scientists, and dreamers poured their lives into reaching further into space. And then finally the moment came. A faint signal was detected from a distant corner of the galaxy. It wasn't the random noise of nature or the simple pulse of a star. It carried rhythm, structure, and purpose. It was a message. At first, humanity could hardly believe it. The message was studied again and again until there was no doubt left. Something was out there. The discovery spread across the world like fire. People filled streets, screens, and meeting halls with excitement. For the first time, humanity wasn't just an isolated species. They weren't alone anymore. Scientists worked day and night to decode the message. It was complicated, layered with strange symbols and sounds. But after weeks of effort, progress came. The signal wasn't a threat, at least not at first glance. It was like an introduction, a wave across the stars. The message carried a repeating tone, almost like saying, "We exist." "Do you hear us?" humanity answered. The reply wasn't perfect, just a simple transmission back showing patterns of math, light, and sound that any intelligent mind could understand. It was humanity's way of saying, "We hear you. We are here too." The response didn't take long. Another signal came back, clearer this time, and with it the first attempt at bridging the gap. Humanity had just taken its first step into galactic communication. At first, the exchanges were cautious. Both sides shared small fragments of information, their star systems, the basic elements of their worlds, their understanding of science. Humanity marveled at every reply. Here was proof that they weren't a cosmic accident. There was another species out there with history, thought, and purpose. Governments debated endlessly over how much to share. Some leaders feared revealing too much, worried that this new species might turn dangerous. Others argued that trust had to be built step by step. In the end, humanity chose to approach carefully but with hope. Months turned into years and the communication deepened. The alien species, though still mysterious, revealed glimpses of themselves. Their world was harsh, filled with storms and environments that had shaped them into survivors. Their culture valued strength, endurance, and pride. They were not gentle by nature, but they were intelligent, capable of building cities, ships, and knowledge. The first real breakthrough came when a human exploration ship and an alien vessel agreed to meet in a neutral zone of space. The meeting was tense but historic. From the windows of their ships, humans saw the strange forms of the aliens for the very first time. They were different in every way, shape, movement, voice. And yet, in their eyes, there was the same spark of awareness that humanity carried. The encounter was careful. No one moved too fast, no one raised weapons. Every gesture was recorded, studied, and repeated. Both sides knew this was history in the making. For weeks after that meeting, the two species continued to exchange visits and trade small items. The aliens offered strange minerals from their world, while humans shared samples of art, music, and language. It was clumsy at times, but it was progress. Ordinary people back on Earth were fascinated. News outlets showed the first shaky images of alien figures, and people couldn't stop talking about them. Children drew pictures, dreamers wrote songs, and scientists called it the greatest discovery in history. Humanity felt like it was standing on the edge of a new era, an age where the galaxy was no longer empty, but alive with neighbors. But even in those early days, there were hints of tension. The alien species seemed distant, often withholding more than they gave. They studied humans with sharp attention, but rarely shared details of their own lives. Their pride was clear, as though they considered themselves above the new species they had found. Some human leaders noticed this and grew uneasy. They warned that caution was necessary, that trust couldn't be given blindly. But others, carried by hope, ignored the warnings. They believed that patience and kindness could build bridges across any divide. The first disagreements came quietly. Small arguments over territory, misunderstandings in trade, or confusion over language. To humans, they seemed minor, the kind of problems any two cultures might face. But to the aliens, each mistake felt like an insult. Their pride made every slight seem larger than it was. Still, most people believed these were only the growing pains of a new friendship. After all, what first encounter could ever be perfect? Humanity had made mistakes even with its own kind throughout history, yet still learned to live together. Why should this be different? Explorers pushed further into shared regions of space, mapping stars and planets. Sometimes they found alien ships nearby watching silently. Sometimes the aliens sent their own explorers to human systems, asking questions and taking notes. It was a strange dance of curiosity and suspicion. Despite the uncertainty, there was still hope. Humanity wanted to believe this was the beginning of something extraordinary. They wanted to believe that after centuries of dreaming, the stars had finally given them companions. But deep down, a quiet question lingered. Could two species so different with such different values truly live side by side? Could the trust being built survive the tests of pride, misunderstanding, and ambition? No one knew then what the future held. No one knew how quickly that fragile bridge of friendship would start to crack. For now, there was only wonder, the wonder of first contact, of voices across the stars, of two civilizations reaching for each other across the endless dark. And so, humanity's journey with this species began not with war, but with hope. The first encounter was remembered as a time of excitement, a time when dreams of unity seemed possible. Yet in the silence between the stars, destiny was waiting. The story that began with curiosity and hope was already moving towards something far more dangerous. The first years after contact were filled with both excitement and nervousness. Humanity had stepped into something it had never experienced before, sharing the galaxy with another intelligent species. At first, things moved slowly. Small exchanges of goods, knowledge, and gestures of goodwill gave people hope. But soon, cracks began to show. The alien species, who had once sent messages filled with curiosity, started to act differently. Their signals became less friendly and more demanding. They asked for resources, rare metals, energy supplies, even territory near human colonies. At first, humanity agreed to some requests, thinking it was a way to build trust. But no matter what was given, the aliens always wanted more. It began with trade routes. Human ships carrying supplies between colonies started reporting strange encounters. Alien vessels would appear without warning, surrounding the ships and forcing them to hand over part of their cargo. Sometimes they claimed it was a tax for traveling through their space. Other times they didn't bother with excuses. They simply took what they wanted and left. At first, human leaders tried to ignore these incidents. They thought maybe the aliens didn't understand human rules of trade. Diplomats were sent to explain using every tool of language and patience they had. But instead of improving, the situation grew worse. More reports came in. Entire convoys of human ships were being hijacked. Colonists traveling to new settlements found their supplies stolen, leaving them stranded and desperate. Human families who had dreamed of starting fresh lives on new worlds were suddenly left with nothing, victims of raids that seemed almost like a game to the aliens. Still, humanity held on to hope. Leaders continued to send envoys carrying messages of peace. They explained again and again that humans wanted cooperation, not conflict. They asked for respect of agreements, for fairness in trade, but the aliens responded with silence, or worse, with mockery. In one infamous meeting, an alien envoy laughed openly when a human representative asked for stolen supplies to be returned. The aliens spoke as if humans were weak, as if their kindness was nothing more than foolishness. Tension grew. On Earth and across human colonies, people began to lose patience. Ordinary workers, farmers, miners, and travelers felt abandoned. Why should humanity keep reaching out a hand of friendship if it was always bitten in return? Yet even as anger built, human leaders kept trying. History had taught them the price of war, and no one wanted to rush into it. Then came the first open attack. A human research outpost located on the edge of shared space was suddenly bombarded. The aliens didn't send a warning or make demands. They simply arrived in force and destroyed it. The outpost wasn't a military base. It held scientists, families, and children. The attack left nothing but ash and silence. The shock was felt everywhere. People were horrified, unable to understand why such a peaceful site had been targeted. But when humanity demanded answers, the aliens gave none. Instead, they sent a message filled with arrogance, claiming the outpost had been trespassing in their space. For many, this was the first real taste of betrayal. Humanity had gone to great lengths to avoid conflict, but instead of respect, they had received cruelty. Trust began to collapse. The dream of partnership with another species was turning into a nightmare. Still, there were voices urging restraint. Some said the aliens were simply testing boundaries, and that patience would win in the long run. Others argued that humanity should pull back, Give the aliens space and avoid further provocation. But while debates continued, the aliens moved forward with their own plans. Raids grew bolder. Alien fleets began targeting entire colonies. Small settlements on distant planets suddenly found themselves under siege. Homes were burned, resources taken, and survivors left with nothing but fear. These weren't acts of misunderstanding anymore. These were deliberate provocations. One story spread quickly. A young colony on a green, newly settled world was surrounded by alien ships. The settlers tried to negotiate, offering trade and even gifts. Instead, the aliens stormed the settlement, stripping it of food, technology, and equipment. By the time rescue ships arrived, the settlers were barely alive. Their stories painted a picture of cruelty that could no longer be ignored. Humanity tried one last time to avoid disaster. A great council was called, bringing together representatives from every major colony and nation. They agreed to send a final peace mission, carrying not just words but a pledge of compromise. The message was simple. Humanity was willing to share, to cooperate, to build a future together. The envoys never returned. Their ship was found drifting in space weeks later, empty and torn apart. No one knew exactly what had happened, but the signs were clear. The mission had been destroyed, its crew lost. This act broke whatever hope was left. People no longer argued over patience or compromise. For the first time, humanity began to feel a deep, burning anger. Ordinary men and women who had once cheered for first contact now demanded protection, demanded justice. And yet, the worst was still to come. The aliens launched their boldest strike yet, not against ships or small settlements, but against a major human colony, a place where millions lived. Without warning, they descended from orbit, their weapons raining fire upon cities. Factories, schools, and hospitals were destroyed, streets filled with smoke and chaos. It was no longer a raid or a provocation. It was a massacre. Families were torn apart, lives ended in an instant. Survivors described the aliens as merciless, laughing as they left devastation behind. News of the attack traveled faster than light. Across Earth and every colony, people wept and raged. Humanity had endured raids, theft, and mockery. But now innocent lives had been taken on a massive scale. The betrayal was complete. The dream of peaceful cooperation was shattered beyond repair. Where once there had been hope, there was now only fury. For the first time in history, humanity saw itself not as divided nations or rival colonies, but as one people facing a common enemy. Leaders who had once hesitated now spoke with one voice. They declared that patience had ended. The galaxy had underestimated humanity's resolve. The aliens had mistaken kindness for weakness, patience for fear. But now they would learn the truth. This was the spark that lit the fire. Humanity had been pushed too far, and when humanity's anger awoke, it carried with it the power of an entire world united. What had begun as a hopeful encounter among the stars was now transforming into something far darker. The aliens believed they could provoke endlessly without consequence. They were about to discover how wrong they were. The massacre of the human colony changed everything. Before that day, there had still been debates, arguments, and hopes that somehow things could be resolved without a war. But after the colony was reduced to ashes, after millions of innocent lives were lost, there was no more space for hesitation. Humanity had been patient, maybe too patient. They had given the aliens chance after chance, but every offer of peace had been answered with cruelty. News of the attack spread across every planet and settlement. Images of burning cities, broken homes, and crying survivors filled every screen. People who had once dreamed of friendship with another species now clenched their fists in anger. Families who had lost loved ones spoke out with voices full of grief and fury. Entire worlds mourned together, and out of that mourning came something even stronger: unity. For the first time in human history, every nation, every colony, every outpost stood together without division. Differences that had once caused conflict among humans suddenly seemed small compared to the threat they now faced. It didn't matter where someone was born, what language they spoke, or which flag they once lived under. Humanity had been attacked as a whole, and humanity would rise as a whole. Leaders from across the Earth and its colonies met in a great council. It was not an ordinary meeting filled with long speeches and delays. It was something far more serious, almost like a final vow. They looked at one another, knowing the weight of their decision. The time for patience was over. Humanity had to act not just for revenge but for survival. In that council, voices rose not with fear but with determination. Some spoke of justice, others of defense, but all carried the same message. Humanity could not allow this to happen again. The aliens had crossed the line that could never be uncrossed. The decision was clear. Humanity would go to war. The announcement shocked the galaxy. For years, humans had been seen as newcomers in space, explorers who preferred peace and discovery. Other civilizations, watching silently from the distance, had whispered that humans were too soft, too forgiving. But the moment humanity declared war, those whispers stopped. Something in humanity's voice had changed. It carried the strength of billions united, the strength of grief sharpened into fury. Preparation began immediately. Factories that once built machines for farming and exploration now worked day and night to build warships. Young men and women volunteered in numbers so great that enlistment centers could barely keep up. People who had never held a weapon before were ready to fight if it meant protecting their families. But it wasn't just soldiers and weapons. Scientists worked without rest, designing new technology, new defenses, and new strategies. Engineers built fleets that could cross the stars with terrifying speed. Every mind and every hand had a role to play. Humanity was not preparing for a small battle. It was preparing for a war of survival. The grief of the colony massacre still burned fresh in everyone's hearts. Survivors told their stories, and those stories spread like fire. Parents who had lost children, children who had lost parents, friends who had lost everything. They spoke not with despair, but with determination. Their words fueled the spirit of the people. It wasn't only leaders and generals who pushed for action. Ordinary workers in factories, miners digging for rare metals, and farmers growing food for the armies all carried the same thought. We will not let this happen again. We will not let our people suffer at their hands anymore. At the same time, humanity's leaders made one final attempt to send a message to the aliens. It was not a plea for peace this time, but a warning. The message was simple. Humanity would no longer tolerate their cruelty. If another attack came, humanity would respond with everything it had. The aliens' reply was chilling. Instead of showing fear or reconsideration, they mocked the warning. They sent back a message filled with arrogance, claiming that humans were weak and would never stand against them. They promised more destruction, more suffering. That was the final spark. Whatever doubts remained were burned away by the arrogance of that reply. Humanity would not wait to be struck again. They would strike first, and they would strike hard. Training camps filled with recruits. Entire fleets of warships gathered in orbit around Earth and other major colonies. The sky was filled with the fire of engines, the roar of machines preparing to leave for battle. For the first time, humanity's fleets carried not the symbols of separate nations, but a single mark, one that represented all of humankind. As the day of the first counterattack approached, a silence fell across Earth and the colonies. It was the silence before the storm, heavy with anticipation. Families hugged each other tightly, knowing their loved ones were leaving for a war that might not bring them back. Cities held vigils for the fallen, lighting candles for the millions lost in the massacre. And in that silence, one truth echoed in every heart. This was no longer just about survival. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity would never bow to cruelty. When the fleets finally launched, billions watched from the ground, their eyes following the trails of light as the ships disappeared into the dark. In those moments, the people did not see soldiers going to war. They saw the embodiment of their anger, their hope, and their unity. The aliens had believed they could break humanity with fear. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. A united people who would fight with everything they had. And so the war truly began. The massacre had ignited a fire that no one could put out. A fire fueled by grief, driven by fury, and carried by the determination of an entire species. Humanity had always been known as dreamers, explorers, and builders. But now the galaxy would learn something else about them. When pushed beyond the limits of patience, when forced to the edge by cruelty and betrayal, humanity could become something unstoppable. The spark had been lit and the storm was coming. The day humanity's fleets finally moved into enemy space was remembered as the moment the galaxy changed forever. For years, humans had been known as explorers, builders, and thinkers. They had been seen as a young species with curiosity in their hearts. But when the first wave of warships crossed the stars to strike back, they showed a side that no one had imagined, a side that would terrify anyone who thought kindness meant weakness. The fleets were massive, larger than anything humanity had ever built before. Ships that once carried settlers to new colonies were rebuilt into war vessels. Cargo freighters had been transformed into heavy carriers. Even the smallest shuttles were now armed with weapons designed for survival. The entire human race had poured its strength into this war effort, and the result was a force unlike any seen before. The aliens who had mocked humanity were not prepared for what came next. They had grown used to raiding weak colonies, striking undefended settlements, and stealing supplies from peaceful ships. They thought humans would never stand up to them, never risk full-scale war. But when the human fleets entered their territory, the arrogance of the aliens crumbled. The first battle was swift and brutal. Human warships attacked with precision, their strategies carefully planned. Every move was coordinated, every strike calculated. Unlike the chaotic raids of the aliens, humanity fought with unity. Entire formations of ships moved as one, covering each other, striking together, and never giving the enemy a chance to recover. The aliens tried to resist, but their fleets were scattered and unprepared. They had relied for too long on intimidation, never believing they would face a united enemy. Their ships were powerful but disorganized, while humanity's fleets were disciplined and relentless. Within hours, the first alien stronghold was reduced to silence. News of the victory spread like fire. Across Earth and every colony, people cheered, cried, and celebrated. For the first time since the massacre, they felt a sense of hope. Humanity was not just surviving, they were winning, but the war was far from over. Each victory only fueled humanity's determination to push further. Battle after battle, fleet after fleet, humanity advanced deeper into alien territory. No longer were they defending. Now they were the storm sweeping across the stars. The aliens, once so proud, began to retreat. But humanity did not let them rest. Every retreat was followed, every base hunted down, every fleet destroyed. The war had turned into something more than strategy. It was personal. Every human soldier carried the memory of the colony that had been massacred, the families who had been torn apart, and the children who had been lost. That memory burned inside them, driving them forward with unstoppable force. In battle after battle, humanity fought not just with weapons, but with fury. Soldiers spoke of fighting as if they carried the voices of the dead with them. Every missile fired, every shot taken, was like justice for those who could no longer speak. The aliens began to beg for mercy. Messages intercepted from their commanders spoke of desperation. They asked for negotiations, for truces, for peace. But humanity remembered what had happened to envoys before, remembered how every offer of peace had been answered with betrayal. No one was willing to trust their words again. Instead, humanity pressed on. Cities of the aliens fell one by one. Their supply lines were shattered, their fleets torn apart. Once they had laughed at humanity. Now they trembled at the very mention of human warships. The difference between the two species became painfully clear. The aliens had underestimated the power of unity. They were divided by pride, by rivalries, by arrogance. Humanity, on the other hand, had come together like never before. Every colony, every nation, every outpost stood as one. That unity gave them strength far beyond what the aliens could ever match. The war was not without cost. Human fleets suffered losses, and brave men and women gave their lives in the fight. Families wept for them, just as they had wept for the victims of the first massacre. But those sacrifices only deepened humanity's resolve. No one wanted their deaths to be in vain. One of the most decisive moments came when humanity's fleets cornered the largest alien armada near a gas giant in their home territory. The battle raged for hours, filling the sky with fire. Alien ships fought desperately, throwing everything they had into the fight. But humanity was relentless. Slowly, surely, they broke through the lines, destroying ship after ship until the once mighty armada was nothing more than wreckage floating in the dark. That battle shattered the enemy's hope. Their leaders tried to flee, but humanity hunted them down, determined to end the war completely. Every corner of their empire was targeted. No base was left untouched. No fleet was left standing. As the war dragged on, a chilling thought spread through the alien species. Humanity wasn't just fighting to win. They were fighting to erase. The memory of the massacre had cut so deep that forgiveness was no longer possible. Humanity had decided that the only way to secure peace was to remove the threat entirely. The galaxy watched in silence. Other civilizations that had remained hidden now observed carefully, realizing what humanity was capable of. They saw not just war but wrath, the wrath of a species that had been pushed too far. The lesson was clear. Humanity could be peaceful, patient and kind, but if pushed into fury, they became unstoppable. By the time humanity's fleets reached the core of alien territory, resistance was barely left. The once proud species that had terrorized colonies and mocked envoys was now broken, reduced to fragments. Their leaders begged for survival, offering promises they once refused to give. But humanity had no interest in promises. The war was no longer about survival alone. It was about justice, about ensuring that no human child would ever again live under the shadow of this enemy. Humanity had been gentle once, but that gentleness had been betrayed. Now all that was left was fury, and fury would not rest until the enemy was gone. Battle after battle, city after city, the end drew closer. Humanity's wrath had become a storm that nothing could stop, and with every victory the memory of the massacre was avenged. This was humanity's darkest and most powerful hour. The world that once dreamed of friendship among the stars had been transformed by betrayal and loss. And now the galaxy would never forget what it meant when humanity was pushed beyond its limits. The wrath of humankind was like fire. Once lit, it consumed everything in its path. And soon nothing would remain of the species that had dared to provoke it. The war had burned across the stars for months, maybe years, depending on how time was measured in space. Humanity had struck with fury, breaking through fleets, destroying strongholds, and chasing the enemy into the very heart of their territory. What had started as retaliation had become something larger, something final. Humanity was no longer just defending itself. It was erasing a threat that had taken too much and shown no mercy. By the time the last stage of the war began, the alien species was no longer what it had once been. Once proud and arrogant, they were now shattered and desperate. Their fleets had been reduced to fragments, their supply lines broken, and their cities left in ruins. Entire worlds that once carried their banners now stood silent, filled with wreckage and ash. Humanity pressed forward, unwilling to stop. To some, it felt almost unbelievable. The species that had once dreamed of unity among the stars, that had once sent hopeful signals into the void, was now carrying out a campaign of annihilation. But to most, it felt necessary. They remembered the colony that had been massacred. They remembered the envoys who had been mocked and killed. They remembered every family torn apart, every child lost. Forgiveness was no longer an option. The final stronghold of the aliens lay deep within their home system. It was a place of towering cities, vast orbital defenses, and fleets gathered around their last remaining world. It was here that they made their final stand. For them, it was the last chance to survive. For humanity, it was the moment to end the war once and for all. When humanity's fleets arrived, the battle was like nothing ever seen before. The skies burned with fire as thousands of ships clashed. The aliens fought desperately, throwing everything they had into the fight. But it was too late. Humanity's fleets were larger, stronger, and united in a way the enemy could not match. One by one, the alien defenses fell. Their ships were torn apart, their stations reduced to dust. Inside the human fleet, soldiers and commanders fought with grim determination. They didn't cheer when victories came. They didn't celebrate each enemy destroyed. Their faces carried only focus and resolve. They knew why they were there, and they knew there could be no turning back. The alien leaders sent messages pleading for mercy. They promised peace, promised to retreat, promised never to harm humanity again. But humanity had heard those promises before. They remembered the envoys who had been killed, the colonies that had been betrayed. This time they answered not with words but with silence and fire. The last alien world was surrounded. Human fleets poured down upon it, breaking through its defenses until nothing remained but open skies. Then came the final strike. Orbital bombardments fell upon their cities, tearing apart what had once been centers of power. Ground forces moved in, sweeping through what was left. The last resistance crumbled. And then, it was over. The alien species, the ones who had once believed themselves stronger, who had mocked humanity's patience and spilled innocent blood, were gone. Their fleets were destroyed, Their cities reduced to ruins, their leaders silenced forever. There were no more raids, no more threats, no more massacres waiting to happen. Humanity had made sure of that. Back on Earth and across the colonies, the news of victory spread. For the first time in years, there was silence across the stars. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of peace. People filled the streets not with cheers of triumph, but with tears of relief. Families hugged their loved ones who returned and mourned for those who never would. The war was over. Humanity had won. But the victory carried a heavy weight. Historians would later look back and call it one of the darkest chapters in human history. Never before had humanity chosen to wipe out an entire species. Some argued it had been necessary, that the aliens would never have stopped otherwise. Others wondered if humanity had gone too far. But in the hearts of those who had lived through the war, one truth stood firm. It was the only way to ensure survival. The galaxy never forgot what happened. Other civilizations, silent and hidden until then, now knew what humanity was capable of. They had seen not just explorers and dreamers, but warriors who could unite in fury. From that day forward, no one dared to underestimate humanity again. Among humans themselves, the war left scars. Cities had been rebuilt, but memories could not be erased. Survivors of the massacred colony carried their grief for the rest of their lives. Soldiers who had fought on the front lines returned home with stories too heavy to tell. Families lit candles for loved ones who never returned. And yet humanity also carried pride. They had stood together in a way never seen before. They had shown the galaxy that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. They had defended their people, their children, and their future with unshakable resolve. The last species that had dared to make humanity furious was gone, annihilated not because humans desired conquest, but because they had pushed too far, because they had chosen arrogance over peace, cruelty over kindness, and humanity had answered in the only way left. Years later, when children asked their parents about the war, the answers were often quiet. Some parents told them of the loss, the pain, and the sorrow. Others told them of the unity, the courage, and the strength. But all told them the same warning. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never push humanity to the edge, because when they rise together, nothing can stand in their way. The stars grew quiet again. Humanity returned to its dreams of exploration, its desire to build and discover. But somewhere deep within, the memory of that wrath remained. It was not something anyone celebrated, but something all remembered. A reminder of what could happen if humanity was ever provoked again. And so, the story of the last species that made humanity furious became a legend told across the galaxy. Not a story of glory, not a story of conquest, but a story of survival. A story that warned of both the kindness and the fury that lived within humankind. The aliens had believed humanity was weak. In the end, they learned the truth too late. Humanity was patient, yes. Humanity was hopeful, yes. But when the line was crossed, when innocent lives were taken and mercy was betrayed, humanity became something unstoppable. And that was the end of them. The last species to provoke humanity, annihilated completely.